A big win for liberty as an affirmative action measure was shot down by voters in California, of all places. Californians rejected Proposition 16, a ballot measure that would have essentially ended California's decades-long ban on racial preferences for government and public institutions. This defeat came despite backing from giant corporations like Facebook, Uber, Lyft, United Airlines, Wells Fargo, and Kaiser Permanente. And the consequences of this effort likely extended beyond the issue of affirmative action itself. In Southern California, Republicans are poised to pick up 2 Democrat congressional seats. Political analysts are attributing this to the backlash against Democrats from Asian Americans who are fiercely against affirmative action. And they have a right to be upset. Colleges like Harvard discriminate against Asian Americans during the admissions process. So much for helping racial minorities. With me now to discuss from the Daily Signal is Jarrett Stepman. Welcome, Jarrett.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. So I've got to tell you, being a California voter myself, I was very concerned that this would pass. But I'm pleasantly surprised that it got shot down by such a large margin of voters, about 13% right now. So what happened?
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. And the only places that was actually successful in any sense were, I believe, 3 counties in the San Francisco Bay Area and Los Angeles County. Every single place else, you had a majority that voted against this proposition. Now, the supporters of Prop 16 say that, well, the language was confusing for voters on the ballot, or they make these kind of excuses. But the fact is, California voters have seen this for a long time. And when things like affirmative action are put on the ballot, they go down in defeat. Even in the most blue progressive states like California, you have a huge upsurge of conservative voters, moderate voters, and a lot of people who, frankly, just look at the language of this saying, well, you know, I thought discrimination was supposed to be a bad thing. And they say, I don't think I want discrimination in my state. And that's exactly what California's delivered in this election.
If it had passed, what would have been the repercussions, some of the consequences for Californians?
Yeah, I think a big thing this obviously impacts is college admissions in California, where they would be allowed to essentially re-implement affirmative action policies that existed before 1996. Now, there's some evidence of that going on, especially with the so-called holistic review admissions process that goes on. But official discrimination, the way that the proponents of Prop 16 wants, would obviously be back on the table. And as we've seen from the support that Prop 16 got from all of the colleges and universities, from the elite institutions in California, that would absolutely be back on the table with the young woke progressives who, you know, obviously work at Fortune 500 companies, who are at our colleges and universities. That would have absolutely been the case all over the state.
And we see that the whole point of this was supposed to help racial minorities, and yet, at least where I live, a lot of Asian Americans came out in full force against Prop 16 because they are disproportionately hurt by these types of laws. Why does the left continue to claim that they're fighting for racial minorities while at the same time throwing Asian Americans specifically under the bus?
Well, I think it's a product of buying their own ideology. I mean, this is what we've heard for the entire last year, the protests that we've had, especially the riots. This is the ideology of the so-called anti-racists, which it turns out the anti-racists in many cases sound just like racists. They want racial discrimination. They just want it for what they see as politically correct groups. But the fact is a lot of Americans see that not even based on their skin color. They see that and say, you know, I don't think discrimination is good for my country. It's not just bad for my kids, but I think it's bad for Americans. It's something that we'd like to get past in this country. We'd like to see something akin to color blindness and meritocracy. And I think a lot of Americans, when it comes down to just regular common sense, understand that. They understand that in a way that our elite institutions in this country completely and utterly missed. Even though average Americans were being force-fed this throughout the summer, people still reject it. I think that's an incredible indictment on those elite institutions that try to push this on Californians.
Especially when you look at California almost as a bellwether for what will happen, ripple effects across the nation. If woke leftists here in California, of all places, are rejecting affirmative action and other such race-baiting tricks from the left, what does that say then for the rest of America? Is there still hope that the rest of America will say, look at the woke agenda and say, no, thank you?
I think there absolutely is. I mean, obviously, we've seen California over the decades. I'm a California. I've seen it change, become an incredibly progressive blue state. But this is a wake-up call, especially on the woke politics that are really at the very heart of the Democratic base. I mean, this is the future of the Democratic Party. The odds are the average person in this country, when they actually know what these ideas are about, when they actually know what the policies suggest for their future, they ultimately reject it. And I think we're going to see Americans all over the country who do not want their state to become like California going to see this and say, we need to do the same thing in our place where we live. We need to reject this before it's too late, before these people grab power and it becomes enforced here. And I think that this, especially going down double-digit defeat, even with all the money that was spent in favor of Prop 16, 20-to-1 advantage for the proponents, and it still goes down in flames, is very hopeful for the future for those who oppose this woke radicalism.
And why do you think that is? Why were corporations throwing so much money at this proposition? And it's strange for me that all these left-wingers, these kids in the streets who out there thinking that they're the counter-revolutionaries, that they're fighting the man. And if they were to look behind them, they'd see all the major politicians and corporations, big tech, all the big institutions are backing them. So they aren't really fighting the man so much as they are the man. So why are corporations funding these left-wing agendas so much?
I really think it's the campus corporate pipeline. I mean, these are people who work for a lot of these companies, especially those who are pushing these initiatives. They have gone through our colleges and universities, publicly funded colleges and universities. They bring those ideas into the boardroom in this country. They promote ideas that I think when you ask the average American, is that a good thing? They say no. But I think that you've seen this kind of nexus of elite that's happened, unfortunately, within America's elite institutions. And I think these are basically all the same people. They drive a lot of the media's agenda. They drive corporate agenda and obviously what we see on campus. You know, these things all work together. This is kind of an elite-driven ideology that the average American still today, even after all we've seen, especially in the last year, ultimately rejects.
And I really hope that that trend continues, especially because we've seen Senator Kamala Harris right now. She is posed to become the vice president. I hope not. I hope President Trump can still eke out a win here. But in case he does not, and Biden and Harris do enter the White House, what really gets me is the night or so before the election took place, she released a video saying that it's not about equality of opportunity. It's about equality of outcomes. That very much dips into Marxism. This, we're all the same. We all get treated the same. That's kind of terrifying, especially for that to be now echoing from the White House.
It really is. It's this change, especially in the rhetoric on the left. They've kind of ditched the equality and they've moved over to equity, which means if equal outcomes do not happen, that is an example of systemic racism. I think that's when you hear about things like systemic racism, that's ultimately what it comes down to. The only way that they can fix this idea of equity is through tyranny, is through authoritarianism. And that's how they're going to get to their end goal. I think a lot of Americans do still reject that. And I think it scares a lot of people because I think Americans are still committed to that old-fashioned idea of equal rights, equal opportunities. And those things are created by a colorblind system that the woke anti-racists ultimately reject.
You're absolutely right, Jarrett, and this fight is not over. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much.